how to secure ENS subdomains. Under the current system, the owner of a name can always rewrite subdomains. They can limit their ability to do that by handing ownership to a contract that restricts what can be done. That contract would generally be a registrar and can thus provide guarantees on ownership, and that's exactly what the .eth registrar does. But there is always the issue that the parent name can also mess with subdomains. So in the case of .eth, that is the root registry, so the root key holders could agree to screw with your name to a limited extent. In the case of a second level name like company.eth, that is the .eth registry, and the .eth registry provides a mechanism for recovering ownership of the name through the deed. If you own the deed, then you can always recover access to control the name and its subdomains by asking the registry to transfer it back to you. And that's from the general principle that it shouldn't be possible to sell the deed which holds the money, but then somebody else has sole control over what can actually be done with the name. So an obvious solution to this is to write a registrar that also takes control of the deed and therefore limits what can be done with it. And that's indeed possible right now. But is hampered somewhat by the fact that we don't know what the permanent registrar is going to look like. And as a result, we have some arbitrary unknown API surface area that will need to be covered in order for people to be able to upgrade names to the permanent registrar. We don't want to end up in a situation where Aragon moves company.eth to ownership, the deed to ownership of this, and then when it comes time to upgrade, it's actually impossible for them to execute the upgrade function because there's no facility for that in the contract. So our goal in this session is to try and discuss what we can do to make it easier to secure subdomains so that we can start getting use out of these subdomains as soon as possible so that people can start one-click registering their name.theirwallet.eth and using it with some assurances as to what will happen. So I thought I'd start off by showing you everything we know about the structure of the permanent registrar. Yeah, it's not a lot.
So are you saying that what you're aiming for is the ability for sub-registrants to have like rights to their name, their subdomain, independent of the parent domain?
We want the parent to be able to waive rights.
Yes.
Oh, to voluntarily waive rights,
Yes.
right? To say, I want this to take on a separate life from
That's
Exactly.
So is the deed a contract?
The deed is a contract.
Okay, it's not just a data structure in the registry, it's a contract.
It is a contract.
And it's arbitrary contract. Might be malicious.
No, the deed is a single fixed contract.
It's a single fixed contract.
Yes.
And the registrar kind of has to provide the deed, assuming we want the money to be required to be locked away.
What do you mean provide the deed?
Well,
Yeah.
so
Well, maybe not all
while we're in the world of deposits that are locked in during the time that the name is yours, we can't trust third-party deeds because
You mean deeds owned by anything other than the registrar?
well, the idea is that it'd be nice if I could provide my own deed, but that breaks the locked deposit.
I still don't know what you mean by provide your own deed. You mean provide your own contract for that?
Yeah.
Okay. To some degree, I mean, the interface of the deed is quite straightforward. It's very limited. I'm not sure how much you could do by having a custom deed contract that wouldn't run into the same barriers that we have now, which is that we don't know what the interface with the permanent registrar.
Well, and that's the idea, is that by being able to put a deed in place that let you make arbitrary calls from the deed,
Yes.
then you're future-proof against API upgrades.
So you could.
But you have to do away with locked-in deposits
Exactly.
owned by the deed.
Which I'm totally happy to do, by the way.
I am as well.
But we're dealing with the system we have now.
why would the parent domain want subdomains to be completely independent?
Because, for instance, people are going to be reluctant to register bob.myetherwallet.eth or, sorry, Newtopia.eth if they know that at any time New could turn evil or be compromised.
It's a pretty common pattern in the current Ethereum crypto space for companies to very vocally and clearly revoke certain abilities
Right.
to be very clear that you no longer need to trust us with your money because we cannot touch it.
And in
That,
fact,
and that doesn't exist in the Web 2 space because you can't revoke your abilities.
Okay, but
and in
from
fact,
the parent domain point of view, no one should be able to register subdomains arbitrarily within your domain, without the parent domain allowing it within your framework. Now, if you're worried that I'm gonna revoke your rights, then your remedy is to just get your own .eth domain.
yes,
so-
the result of that is that fewer people will use subdomains and be able to register easy one-click domains, and we think that that's a useful use case.
Yeah.
To make it super easy for someone new to the community to type in a word and click one button and be able to use ENS instantly.
Yeah, so if we want to talk specifics about like our specific use case,
The
Okay.
wallet, right?
yeah, so we would like the onboarding flow for new users to be like, you know, you arrive, you learn about Ethereum, you get your account, and the next step would be to, you know, assign a name to your account to make the entire Ethereum ecosystem easier to use. So in that case, you know, hey, what's your name or what's your username or what's your, you know, like, by the way, this is being public on the blockchain, so don't do anything too crazy. But, you know, like, say that their name's Bob, they would like the name Bob, okay? Bob's available, then they assign that to their address, okay? Now they get this Bob identifier to all of their friends to use this for them to send them email, right? Now, I don't want to be able to revoke that. Like, I don't want to be able to take that away. I don't want to be able to unlink those. There are cases where, yes, you do want that ability, but like in our use case, we don't. We want Bob to know that they're always going to be like Bob is going to go to this address, you know. And so when I'm thinking about constructing a contract, even though I know that I'm trustworthy and that like I don't get anything and I have no reason to unlink Bob from his address, the reality is like I shouldn't allow that anyways, because even though I'm not going to do it, just putting that implementation in the real world means that one, it's possible. Two, if we're compromised in any way, it's possible. Three, if another party comes along and is like, hey, they already built that contract, let me use this contract and do it, and they're not trustworthy, you know, then you have this situation. So in my world, the contract that we launched with subdomains, you know, basically I want it to be a best practice type thing because it is going to be widely used. So that means we're going to test the heck out of it, and we're going to make sure that, like, from a user perspective, it makes sense, but also that, like, anything that we don't intend to ever use, we can't do, you know, and that includes unlinking users' like chosen name or identifier with their address. Like, we don't want to do that, therefore we shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Does the power of that ability to revoke your abilities make sense?
Well, it's the same situation when you see people using like a Hotmail address for something super important, right? It's like, don't do that because you're using a domain that you don't have direct control over.
Right.
You can have,
I'm sorry.
but you can have that, we are, you know, doing something that can provide
So
you
right,
that
you're
control.
saying you can give that control, but I'm just having a hard time getting, I see the case, I see
Yeah.
where you're going.
I think
I have a
that,
hard time getting my head around it because I'm stuck in inverted tree hierarchy land where everything below your node should be at least under your authoritative control. Yes, you can be trustworthy about it, but that's just
and
where
that's,
I'm having a hard time.
yeah, and I
So-
understand that. I think there's two things that you're having trouble with, and they're totally valid, by the way. Like, one is like, the blockchain world is just different.
Yeah,
Like, we just
that's
have to
the
accept
part.
that. The other thing also is that, like, the ease of use type situation, like, we're really early in this space, and like, one thing that my Wallet aims to do is provide people with really easy access. And like, yes, of course they could go and do a domain auction and like get their own name that they fully control. Of course they could do that, but will they? And the answer is no. Like, as we've seen, like, we have more than 180,000 users, you know, and yet, like, we're talking about the entire ecosystem where like everyone in this room on average, say, has 10 names, you have 180,000 domains registered. That means that every MyEtherWallet user does not have any. You know, like, only a small percentage. If we want to create a world, which I do, like, me personally, like, one of my goals with MyEtherWallet is to make Ethereum more accessible. I think that having every single person having a name associated with their address and get rid of these OX random string of numbers situations that's human readable, that you can say, like, I mean, this is when I first started, like, the value, it's so dumb, but, like, the value of ENS was literally, like, I saw a tweet on my phone, right, where someone was like, hey, I just finished registering my name, donate to me, and I could literally go to my computer and donate to him, like, while reading the tweet on my phone. Like, there's no copy and paste necessary, there's no double checks necessary, like, there's his address, or there's his name, and, like, then it shows his address, and it's on 0, and I was able to send, like, just like that. And it's such a small thing, but it really shows, like, the power of this. And then the other thing is that, we get emails all the time of people who send an address that doesn't exist. So, that happens.
And I think another use case could be that if you can revoke the super button can revoke subdomain rights, we can stay away from the dispute resolution. Well, we are talking about the root level, because if you start providing whatever argument comes to you, but if you clear that, like we said, we don't have a
in some way, like, what we're saying that we want is, like, experimentation with different namespaces, right? And they're hierarchical. If you inherit some properties in the higher, right? Like, it's never gonna be at the root. You can't replace the subdomains, right?
I mean, we can do that right now.
We could, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we put together and say,
that's what, right.
0.
And so there's a definite extent to which, like, there is structure that's passed down from, like, the parent hierarchy, parent names in the hierarchy, right? And the question is, like, okay, do we, like, for the TLDs, okay, we don't want to collide with anything in DNS. Okay, that seems to be one of the only constraint that we really have. Like, do we want to have multiple TLDs that have different structures for different, like, names, or we say, okay, the TLD that we have for ENS is going to be, like, somehow respect no matter what revocation of rights actually people want to do at a lower level, right? Because if we say, okay, in that case, then somehow, we definitely can't do any kind of aggressive name reassignment, because this kind of thing wouldn't be possible, right?
So it's worth noting too that in the ENS, the owner of the name does always have and will continue to always have complete rights over its subtree. But what we're talking about here is a system where you transfer ownership. The owner of the name is actually not you, but it's a contract.
Right.
And that contract may be written such that it will undertake certain actions.
But still, the root could take away your
Yes.
So you say you always have it forever, except unless something happens in the root decide,
and I would
like,
propose,
eventually to upgrade it, or in a way that's not true. Or
and I would propose that we align that as or treat that as a base assumption, that we cannot. We know
We're worried about that right now.
Yeah, and we know that there's no way we can build something that is robust against the dispute resolution finding against the root name and so on. And
but also, if you say, okay, we're just, like, not going to do it, then that means that, like, there's a real incentive for people to create another registry which does do it, because the quality and type of names that you're going to get there is going to be quite different. And the way that it's curated, the system is, like, provides names that can't be provided as a sub-registry of these names.
I think we're off track. Can we go back to subdomains?
Yeah, I'd like to just ask something to help ground the discussion, because as far as I can understand, you could already deploy a contract and transfer ownership of the domain to that contract, and you could make it a factory, so it could be very well audited code. So to me, this looks like it could easily live in user space. It doesn't really need to be ENS responsibility at all. Is there something I'm overlooking for why this has to be a core feature?
Yes, because, well, not so much a core feature as whether we can apply a reasonable set of restrictions to how we will design the permanent registrar that won't break our assumptions. Because the issue right now is that when it comes time to migrate to the permanent registrar, owners of existing deeds will have to do at least one thing, which is call this function here, transfer registrars with your existing name. And that then internally calls this function on the new registrar. So this is the only thing we know about permanent registrars that will have this function. But In addition, that may not be all that is required to transfer your deed to the new registrar. There might be renewal fees. You might have to call something that like sets up information before you can transfer the name. And without knowing any of those, it means that writing a sub-registrar here is problematic because we can't be sure that if we lock things down, we won't lock them in a way that makes it impossible to migrate the name.
Can we, so the,
I'm gonna say,
just,
there's proxy identity contracts already that are good at forwarding transactions. So
Yes.
if this kind of sub-owning, deed owning contract had the ability to pass through the transactions, but restricted them in a certain variety, like, what is
the value
it?
transfer.
Right, the specifically transferring it, we're reassigning a subdomain owner.
But can you provide a definition that such a contract could mechanically execute to determine whether they're being nasty or not?
Oh,
It can never execute the bytecode that starts with, that has the transfer byte, that has the transfer signature, right?
But can we say that is a restriction we could propose to add to the permanent registrar, that no method other than transfer will be unsafe? But that's something we would have to explicitly consider.
so I think there's a way to do this in a different direction.
Okay.
Which is that when a deed upgrades itself, so I think that if we're gonna, can we accept that deeds will, that locking away if we can get rid of deposits having to be locked in deeds, then we get a lot more freedom.
So I'm not sure, I'm
Yes.
struggling to understand the
Yes,
difference
because-
between the owner being the smart contract that controls it or the deed being the smart contract that controls it.
No, so the deed is not controlled.
I
The
know.
deed just holds ether, but both the deed and the name have an owner.
Right.
And if you are the owner of the deed, you can always ultimately assert ownership of the name.
Okay. I thought the deed was like somehow
We should just.
tied to the, more closely tied to the ownership of the name. But so is there like any more, can you give me the authenticity there?
So the name registrar is what owns .eth, .eth name, and when it sells you a subdomain, you place a bid and your bid gets stuck in this deed contract, and the deed contract has an owner field. And as far as the .eth registrar is concerned, anyone who can come along and prove that they own that deed will be on-demand granted ownership of that
And
name.
the owner of that deed can just transfer the ownership of that.
The owner, yes.
So deed has a transfer thing.
Yes, deeds can be transferred between accounts,
Okay, great.
and names can be transferred between accounts.
Okay,
Yeah,
all the freedom that we need just in the smart it's an owner smart
Names are
contract.
next to deeds.
So
Getting all the freedom that's necessary then is the owner smart contract. We can do all arbitrary stuff to restrict rights by just not letting the owner transfer.
owner of the deed, yes.
Yeah.
So ideally, something like the sub-registrar like this needs to own the deed and do nothing with it, except, contractually required things to keep the name active, and own the name and use.
Sorry, what's that?
subdomains.
What do you mean contractually?
Well, like if there is a renewal process, then it needs to participate in the renewal process.
Well, I would say that you don't necessarily need to have any just someone needs to pay the fee for this thing.
So if there are things a deed needs to do to remain active, then that can't be owner of that deed.
So ideally, what you do is you just give the deed to the zero address and then be done. If what you want it to do is
If we knew there would never be any renewals or any dispute process or anything that depended on ownership of the deed, then yes, you would just transfer it to zero and be done. But we know that that's
So what is the owner of the deed? Are they also associated with the sub-registry?
The sub-registry needs to own the deed in order to have guarantees over what we've done with it.
Well, there's other needs for the.
Okay, so I think you may be missing something. So there's this call called set owner. Okay, and I can literally right now, if I wanted to set you the owner, your address and the owner of Utopia, but then I could just transfer Utopia and you would no longer have it. So like I could set you as the owner and you could do things as the owner, but at any point in time, I could literally transfer it and get your back.
Unless you transfer it to a contract that does not have a set ownerability.
Yes.
Right, and I think that's what this
So there's
this is what I'm
already-
trying to discuss
Yes.
about subdomains. I'm trying to figure out the best way to set up a thing that, okay, what does this contract look like? What do we need to maintain access to and be allowed to do, and how can we make sure that like we can't screw people, but also we don't screw ourselves when we upgrade and end up like Utopia's only on the
So
old registrar.
the first part of the question is usually answered because we can build registrars now that have the properties. What we don't know is, like we said, how it's going to upgrade to when we get the permanent
Right.
registrar in place.
Nick, can you
I-
confirm this real quick, just so that we have something that everybody can look at?
No, the deed does not own the name. And
Oh,
owner
sorry.
owns the name, but the old
Let's
registrar.
just forget
will-
about the name, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter.
Okay,
So,
name system, screw the names.
okay, so we've got a deed right now, and it currently holds the deposit, hence the $signs. Okay, the deed has to call upgrade
No,
register
the owner of the deed has to call upgrade registrar.
The deed can't do anything.
on here.
Yes.
So like that's one thing that we need to make sure that our contract does, is like it has
Okay.
the ability for the
Okay.
owner of our new registrar to call upgrade. Like,
Let me just
Okay,
take
so-
a second to clarify something. There are two owners of the owner of the deed and the owner of the name. The analogous situation here is that if you buy a
So I
domain,
thought that would be like, that would be like, already somewhere I'm missing.
they do not have to be the same. So the analogy here is if you buy a domain name, you can log in with your registrar credentials into the registrar and transfer ownership of that name to anyone else you want. Independently of that, you can set the DNS resolver to point to anybody's machine. They are now responsible for resolving your name. And these are the two owners. One owns the actual name in the registry and can transfer ownership and revoke it and renew it and all that stuff. And the other is responsible for setting where the name resolves to and creating subdomains and all that sort of stuff.
And does any of them like trump the other from the first set?
Yeah, so just like in DNS, if you own the registrar credentials, you can change where the DNS points to and you can override that.
So that's the one that we're talking about, like making a smart contract. We're talking about making both of them smart
Both of them would be.
Let- let-
And then having like some kind
Let
of.
Piper show his.
Okay, so hold on, let's verify
Yes.
our diagram.
Yeah.
The deed ultimately controls,
No, the deed
The
serves as a, well, the deed, ownership of the deed, the owner of the deed ultimately controls the name.
so the deed ultimately controls the name by, it's the deed has to come from here, right? Now
The deed
it's
controls
triggered
the
from
name.
outside somewhere.
No, the owner of the deed, it's.
We're saying the same thing.
Yeah,
you say so?
the deed is just like an inanimate object.
Yes,
like
it has to
saying-
be triggered
So
from
you
outside,
can't-
of course, but
No, but the deed does nothing, it just sits there and has an owner
No,
field.
someone has to call it, the owner has to call it, right?
the owner of the deed
Change
can
the
set
owner, yeah.
the owner, okay, but it kind of doesn't matter. We have the deed,
Yes,
the owner calls upgrade registrar on the old
Yep.
registrar.
Yep.
The old registrar
yes.
calls accept registration transfer on the new registrar.
Yep.
Then what happens?
That's open, that's the issue.
That's
Okay,
it.
but we now have a picture.
Yes,
But
and
let's
at
accept-
any time, the owner of the deed can call set owner on the old registrar, and that will adjust who owns the actual name, the ability to set resolvers and create subdomains
Yep.
and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. So this one is the
Ultimate-
ultimate
The
point
top
of
dog,
control.
yes,
And the one that resolves the names just changes what resolves the names.
and creating subdomains.
And
stuff.
creates other names.
Got it. Okay. And that's where I was confused, is that I thought that this is what interacted, which means that, anyways, fix this. Thank you.
So, what if the registrar didn't require the owner to upgrade it, the deed or to renew it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
We talked
it's
about-
it's hard coded now that it does require the owner to upgrade
And we
it.
would have to upgrade
And
it
that
to change that?
Yeah, but that is a feature because the goal is that everybody who bought a name now agreed to the current construction of the registrar.
Right.
If we change that, then we believed when we were writing this that they should have to look at the new registrar and explicitly agree with transferring their deed to it. Because the current registrar has some quite severe restrictions on what it can do with your money. But if you, by agreeing to transfer it to the new one, there may be a completely new set of restrictions. It could be give all the money to Alex, and that only happens if you agree to to transfer it.
Locked away the ability to do anything with
Yeah.
people's key.
But what we could do, so yeah, interestingly, even the ENS root key holders can't take deed money unless you agree. But what we could do is certify that the permanent registrar, any upgrade and renewal mechanisms other than this one function we've already coded in, can be done by anyone. And if that's a restriction we're happy with, then we can say that, and that makes writing sub-registrars a lot simpler.
Why did you do it that way for? Like, why don't you just deprecate the old registrar, then in the new registrar, you atomically delete the deed and create a new one for them?
Because if it was possible for us to impose a new registrar that could do things to the deed immediately without any user intervention.
No, I mean, like, so you can imagine, like, if they want to renew their deed, so as part of the renewal, they call it transaction.
Yep.
And as part of the renewal, they delete the old one and they create a new one.
That's what this does, yeah.
Is that what it's doing?
I mean, we call it an upgrade rather than a renewal, but that's basically what you're talking about here.
Okay, so they need to delete the deed.
Well, so it'll be up to the permanent registrar, but one of the things it can do is just delete the deed and create a replacement upgraded contract at that time, yeah. And so, yeah, that's something else worth bearing in mind. With the sub-registrar, we can't even assume that the deed will stick around after calling that upgrade function, because the permanent registrar may have a completely different mechanism for tracking ownership.
And also keep in mind that, like, if we do a subdomain, if Mindful does a subdomain, right, and we don't we don't take any of this into consideration, we don't have this conversation, then, like, the ENS is going to be, like, forced to make decisions about our contract decisions, or forced to, like, acknowledge that, like, everyone's subdomain is going to go away.
Yes.
So I'd much rather do it this way, where we discuss how this is going to work and make guarantees so that the ENS, because I think that the ENS design is more important than, like, our subdomain contract design. And, like, I don't think that, like, when we're talking about things in the future, that, like, what Mindful does should be taken into consideration.
So what you're saying is you could blackmail us into constructing the permanent registrar in a certain
Like,
way.
if we don't figure it out now, yeah, like, it's a thing that I
Got it loud and clear.
We're not going to make this service for our users until you tell us.
Well, I mean, I also have to, like, I mean, okay, yes, but seriously,
So
like,
the owner calls update on the old registrar. How does the deed learn who its new? Because the old registrar is the only one who's able to model deed funds.
Yeah.
How does the deed get its pointer changed to the new
So
registrar?
the old registrar has a set registrar function.
Okay. And
So
so
the deed has a set registrar function, and it can only be called by the old registrar.
okay, and so it will call, yep, that's what I was looking for. So the old registrar will call set on the new registrar, and then it'll call the new registrar and tell it you have a new deed.
Yeah, so when you call
Okay.
transfer registrars,
So I'm failing to see why a standard proxy contract as the owner is not a completely satisfactory solution for this, and it is up to people who want to relinquish control to determine how to build that.
because
There is not
These
going to be a
are
one size fits all.
right, no, but we're not trying to find a one-size-fits-all solution. We're trying to find a way that these people could write these contracts in the knowledge that it won't break horribly when we transition to
Okay,
the
so
registrar.
in a future-proof
Yeah.
way. Well, since
Because the whole nature of it is restricting you on what you can do, and we don't know what you'll need to do to transfer to the permanent
Is
registrar.
it just possible that when a domain upgrades to the new registrar, that all its subnodes are gonna come with it? Or is that what we're trying to avoid, or is that what we're trying to enable?
So the registrar doesn't care about subnodes as long as you own the root node.
But if
And-
they're giving away ownership to the subnodes, right, if somebody's saying, I'm giving you power, then is that what we're worried about, how to get those to upgrade to?
They don't need to. The actual resolution stuff is all stored in the registry. And none of this touches the registry. It's only the omission, the ability, basically the exclusive right for nobody else to register that name. So, there's no migration process to touch subdomains.
So
yeah.
The problem is, the problem is, what if
there's a fee, he pays the fee. What happens if the fee isn't paid, then all subdomains lose access to their addresses. So it's along the plans we have. So how it's gonna affect subdomains.
Suppose I'm your landlord and I use your house, and I say, I will throw this away, and a year from now, the electricity company goes, oh, we need access.
Yeah.
I'm screwed. If I'd known ahead of time when they would need access and how, I could have made provisions for that. And we're trying to nail down what provisions are going to be needed for future access in order to keep the domain from using it, so that people can impose restrictions that don't lock them into a corner.
I think it's all in the domain. Sorry, it's all in the domain. Why is that continuity? If they let the domain expire, all the subnodes are like.
Right, so one of the things we can do is ensure that anybody can review the domain, not just.
Well, then what if there's a use case or a situational case where the parent wants to retire all the subdomains and then tough saying,
No, not tough. You provide a function that allows them to relinquish the domain, only callable by the owner. If you retain that ability, then you give it up. If you haven't, then you can't.
Right, we can give it up though.
Yes.
And
I can't imagine anyone doing it, but
But
someone's gonna do it.
they do want to do it, yeah.
Can you take it back to the room?
I don't know what you mean.
Click on the picture of people.
Okay, great, yeah. You know what, I would like to put the other owner and more of the interface here. So owner's about there's another one you can call, you said you can call set.
Pretty much everything is actually called on the registrar.
Right, by the owner. So you guys call it
So
if you want to change the owner here,
Yeah,
the owner calls the registrar, and the registrar calls the deed to check who the owner is.
I think we should try to merge the conversation because
Yes.
so here's one thing, right? So as far as I could tell, all we actually need to do is to promise to every subdomain user that the registration process will not require a transfer or a set owner function to be called.
Okay.
Because then if you create the contract that allows you to do anything but do a transfer, then you can prove to your users you won't be able to transfer those domains, but you can prove to them that you'll be able to do the upgrade process.
We also need to guarantee that no functions other than those two will be harmful for subdomain owners.
right, and that's the.
Well, but that's not such a big problem because what you're saying, what you're telling is that I cannot guarantee that I will not have powers that I don't know which powers are those, right? What are you saying? I'm saying, look, I don't have the power to transfer your thing. Maybe if I get new powers, you have to trust me not to use them, but I don't know, I cannot rely on.
No, I mean, simple example is say that in the new registrar, we have a dispute resolution policy that allows us to migrate a name from you to you, right? Then any of these guarantees about either the name owner or the subdomain owners must, by definition, go away.
Well, we said at the beginning that we were going to allow discussion about mechanisms that are outside the scope of this, that can't be affected no matter what.
Yeah, but now sounds like we're committing to not.
So just
Yes.
from what I've seen here, it sounds like the old registrar, so when we send our upgrade, the old registrar can call the function on the deed to set the registrar to the new registrar.
Yes.
The new registrar can pick up the old deed, and if it needs a new deed, we can basically we can then call an upgrade function on the new registrar, which will then carry out whatever work we need to do. If we need to move balance across from the deed, we can't remember. If we need to upgrade the deed to something different, if we need to make, or require additional information, whatever it might be, it sounds like we can do that without needing to worry about the contract between the deed and the old registrar any more than we already have, because anything else is a call to the new registrar that we can validate by being the owner of the contract, the owner of the deed.
Which is a contract, which, yeah. I mean, Alex's solution seems like the closest we've come so far, which is that we should recommend people to write a proxy contract that allows the owner to call anything on the existing registrar except functions we've declared harmful, like transfer and set owner.
Are there other ones, by the way?
How about this? What if our recommendation is that plus an API for adding new restrictions? Because the idea there is that is that we may add new APIs, but before they upgrade,
That makes sense.
they can then blacklist those APIs from themselves.
So I can upgrade my personal contract, then we call the new registrar, then we go to the new registrar
And at that
And
point,
at that
you've
point,
already
I-
locked yourself out of any
of the
harmful
new
APIs.
harmful APIs.
If your use case for giving subdomains out is because you want your users to be able to use names instead of addresses, and you don't, and it takes too long to go through the auction process, you want a one-click registration. Why aren't we just making the registry, since it's already gone through the auction, Sunrise, a one-click auction?
That's not
one-click
why we want to
process.
do that.
And
Yeah.
she wants to give out hers, but she also wants to do it trustlessly. Like,
It's
don't
the
trust
same
me.
way people don't keep logs.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, okay.
so
which we don't do, by the way.
So
Like, we don't
clarify
log it
your
up, I
suggestion.
think,
one way to do it would be
People
to
call it
say
crazy.
that
This is
the
like the
permanent
opposite.
registrar will have a capabilities.
We don't have regs either, I don't know how
And it
many.
will-
Not necessarily.
Well, let me,
It
so
doesn't mean that in the
it,
real world,
it will
I
have
know.
a function that allows you to answer the question.
No, I said- I said-
Hold on, everybody.
It will allow the sub-registrar to ask the question, does this function require this capability? And the capability can be, we can define a few categories of things that you might want to do, deleting the name, giving it away, renewing it. And then whoever's writing the sub-registrar can say, this proxy contract can only call functions on the registrar in this capability set, i.e. a very restricted one or a wider one or whatever suits your particular needs. Does that seem reasonable?
I think it fits. Can I say it back to you in other words? So the idea is that we have an idea of what types of operations we can perform, which are typically something like create, delete, and update. Those are right. So like on a create subnode, delete subnode, update subnode. And the idea is that the registrar knows what functions have those capabilities on itself, and thus can let a contract declare which ones it's allowed to do.
Yes, or allow it to check what capabilities a given function requires before executing it, and therefore that proxy contract can assert that it will never call a function that deletes.
They categorize the calls.
Yes.
Okay, and then that list is like an external thing, and so then my contract would be like, I don't do anything harmful, and then there's an external list of what's defined as harmful.
And the external list is in the new register.
The idea is that like the
Yeah.
fallback function is generally probably what is used to do upgrades, and then you're future proof in that regard. The fallback function may never perform in anything that affects subnets. Effectively, it could reject its ability to update or delete subnodes using any fallback function.
There's flags, like on network, there's a whole bunch of registry flags that say what operations are created on the domain, at what time. And you can make a requirement that, that permission, So you can give out subdomains with a certain flag enabled, and then people who want to control the subdomains don't enable that flag. There's off codes that you need to transfer the domain. You can actually propagate something similar all the way down, and if you don't want to, you just retain.
So I think that seems like a good idea. I think we need to offer an additional promise, which is that there will be some way for a non-owner to pay for renewal if there's a renewal. Because the rights aren't just to prevent somebody from calling something, but also to require something to happen. Because otherwise you could, by inaction, cause the name to go away.
Right, and that's something that is pretty easy to bake into any contract.
Probably, unless there's unforeseen difficulties.
Yeah.
In the future, do we want to have these permissions controlled by the registry instead?
So I think sorry, what do you mean?
I mean, so like you can have the registrar say, like the owner say, okay, remove my abilities to ever call this to the registrar, and then the registrar will be like, okay, yeah, now you can never call that. And then
I'm within restricting what.
there's a less control you need to have it in some way. It's like
Yes,
not ability to
yes.
Our own imagination early on. But no, not in terms of a good way, but in terms of someone comes up with a different idea for what they can do. outside of CRUD, then
I have to do it with a new name.
Can nodes get orphaned in this? Like, let's say the parent domain does categorize the keys or whatever, right? And subnodes, like it's gone, and then the subnodes all continue to, some of them continue to exist.
So I think if it doesn't pay for renewal, then yes, otherwise no.
Yeah.
So, but it is possible for orphaned subnodes.
Only because of the renewal.
I mean, if it doesn't pay for renewal, somebody could re-register it. I mean, unorphaned
Well,
it's either in a hospital or a friendly patient.
bear in mind that we should allow anyone who pays the renewal of the domain, because it's a,
Yes, that's what they just
yeah,
said.
yeah, because then, like we said, if you've got a subdomain you care about, you can pay the renewal fee to the parent node to keep everything running.
Yeah.
So it's still out of your, you can still keep that running even if the owner sort of,
But that's a
goes off
basic
and forgets about
contract,
it.
right?
Sorry.
Like that's just in the contract of the subdomain, right? Like I have a,
No.
We can't code in letting users renew because we don't know what the renewal function will look like yet. But we can promise that whatever renewal function we develop will be callable by anyone.
So yeah,
okay.
so I like the idea
Aside.
of having the new registrar have some limits saying that I can do this and I can do that, I promise. I just don't understand is that right now, how can we code something based on that new registrar doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So we can't actually say how do you code a subdomain thing that will call that restrictive function in the future.
We just write an IP with that API and say we guarantee the registrar will have this API.
I still don't see why that is better than what Piper said about just blacklisting manually a few functions that you don't want to
Because it
call.
gives you more flexibility about how much you want to constrain your sub-registrar. Like if instead of just one blacklist, it's two blacklists or three blacklists with different categories of operations.
In terms of anyone calling them, that's not a blacklist, that's, I mean, it basically just says, it basically just guarantees people who are using the sub-registry that they could upgrade it if necessary in order to keep compatible with ENS in the future. And then the blacklist of privileges gives them the knowledge that they won't be overridden by either one.
I mean,
And so if either law doesn't want to pay for the upgrade, their users can.
I actually wonder if this is going to work simply because for any function that you might put on the permanent registrar that you only would want to call, them not calling it might be a bad thing for their users.
Mm-hmm. Why? Why is it bad for users for someone else to pay for their?
No, I mean, we're assuming here that there are categories of operations that only the owner should be able to call while the permanent registrar.
Yeah.
And then we need like lists of permissions for that, whether it's harmful. But if those functions exist, then surely they exist because not executing them could be harmful in some way. In which case, the owner always has the option of not executing.
But there's only harmful in some way, in some circumstances, right? So in some circumstances, like we judge that it's more harmful to be able to call them.
Right, but in those circumstances, the owner still has the option of not calling them.
Right, but that
So
requires
things-
trust from their users, for example.
Right.
The whole goal here is to minimize the amount of trust the users have.
Right.
And that's why we have the option of turning these things down. Exactly.
But then the ultimate turning these things off is just to say the owner cannot call anything on the registrar.
That's right. Me, I did wonder that you should be able to not have an owner and just have and just kind of specify your function mechanism and application. If you want to. But I don't think that's best for that high network effect.
And in the same way that we talked about renewal being allowable by anyone, could we not have the upgrade function on the register being allowable by anyone? Again, it just seems like we're creating complexity in sub-registrars at the moment.
So I would
I think
expect,
it's like limiting.
I would expect that the sub-registrar would allow anyone to call that function. And we can do that.
Well, the
right
new
now.
registrar.
Well,
But
no,
upgrade-
you call
well, we
the
used to-
the upgrade function is on the old registrar.
Yeah, but once we get it to new, say we have a new, say we need we're gonna have to put a who is in there, so we need an email address in there, okay, before it becomes active. So we move to the new registrar, it doesn't have an email address, so it sits as inactive. Can we allow someone in some authoritative way to put that in?
But we don't know what it looks like, so we
Well, if the new registrar has that,
Yes.
and we can find some way of getting an authorization list for that. And so one of the things I've done in contract as well is separate the registrant from the owner. So in my sub-registrar contracts, the person who registered it still has the ability to do some things. They're not the owner, they can't, like I said, they can't change subdomains of their own. Similar, but being the person who originally registered it gives you some privilege, like say, do updates of that nature. So is there something like that that could be done?
You can build a distinction between registrant and owner.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
It just seems otherwise if we're like we say, buildings,
We already have
interface
two
between
owners.
the two.
Like,
Or owners, yeah, I would rather have one owner, but
I mean,
just to see if we can make that work, but also like, I still don't really understand.
We
I
will
kind of
always have
understand.
two owners, because the ENS registry itself is what does resolution and creating subnodes and so on, that is an owner field. And that is what, gives you permissions to the ENS hierarchy.
Yeah.
But independent of that, you have the registrar which handles money and has the deed and everything.
Yeah,
Bear in mind you create a deed
it's
when
just
you
because you wanna separate the money out, to make it lower risk.
No, because also one immediate use case here is I buy a domain and I want to create a sub-registrar. So I write a sub-registrar and I transfer ownership of the ENS record to that sub-registrar. I now own the deed, it now owns the registrar. If I want to upgrade a registrar, I can do that. If it owned the deed by virtue of owning anything, then I would have to write a function into the ability to get it back. And then I would have to in fact, it would have been impossible to write any sort of sub-registrar because of this upgrade thing, unless it had a function to just give it back to you. So it reduces complexity of operating with, I want to create a sub-registrar, but it doesn't have to deal with deed ownership, which is outside its scope of responsibilities.
Okay, so the sub-registrar is the name owner
Yes.
for,
The ultimate thing that it has to be is the owner of the name, and not just create subnames and so on.
okay. Right, so it's more complex to build also the access for the deed. But even though it might simplify the registrar.
It might.
I missed a couple minutes of conversation while I was PAing and thought that we're not exactly, like, building granular permissions is not what we need. What we need is just the ability to lock the subdomain API and to unlock the subdomain API. Okay? I mean, because that's what we're talking about is we want to make sure that the owner that the users can be assured that the owner can make arbitrary calls, but only during the time in which the subdomains are locked. The idea is that now you write that proxy contract so that it always locks them on the way in and unlocks them on the way out. And so it can do arbitrary things in the middle. It can call anything that it wants again. But the registrar will have all of its subdomains locked down. And the only thing is whatever the other APIs are.
What does it mean to lock them down?
It means that the subdomain records cannot be changed in any way.
But the thing you do while they were locked might have been to change your own permissions to make future changes.
Well, the idea is that we don't have permissions.
Right, but so you lock all the subdomains, and then the thing you do is transfer ownership to something that has no restrictions, and then you unlock them.
that's the biggest problem right now is that, like, and this is for almost anything, like, I'm imagining that at some point someone is going to convince someone to pay for a domain, and then they're gonna set the owner, so glad, you pay me for this domain, give me all your money. Okay, I set you as the owner, you're like, sweet, I'm super happy, and I just transfer it away, and now I have both your money and my name.
I'm
But
more
then
worried
you know one
about,
owner from the other.
I'm more worried about someone selling someone a name, waiting until they start using it, and then changing it to point to their own wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
But the one thing that came up while you were away peeing was that having permission sets for what the owner can call on the registrar probably isn't enough because they have the ability to not call those functions.
Yeah.
And not calling those functions may be detrimental. So
we may not be able to solve this at this level, and it may be up to those people who want to revoke their permissions require either an imperfect replication that may not be future-proof, or to put in place a governance structure that allows them.
So what I was hoping to establish here is whether we can find some minimal restrictions we can put on the eventual design within a registrar that makes that a lot easier.
I mean, I like the one you had earlier, which said like you only need to have this one function that you call if you have there's like one existing one updated and one.
Right. So
So as long as you like program the smart owners to be smart contracts that like only do that and only register according to this like scheme, then like it should be fine.
So the question is that a restriction would be within a registrar, but the only function that needs to be called by an owner to fully upgrade that one function already is owned by.
I mean, I do you think there's lots of generality there?
I'm worried because I don't know what sort of renewal or disputes or whatnot mechanism the registrar might have that
I
not
know
being able to call will be harmful.
I know we can't account for the things that we can't think of, but I need at least one thing that we can think of that would require more than just the transfer, like.
Right, so if we had at least one, that would help a lot.
Yeah.
But like, not being able to find one doesn't mean.
Here's one, so we've got kind of two approaches, right? We've got a API blacklist and an API whitelist. So if we're doing API whitelist and one thing that's accepted is a transfer, maybe just part of the whitelisted transfer function is a new contract to own the new deed that can
Right, so anything that isn't anything that isn't this function is callable by anyone. How about anything that's required for the upgrade that isn't this function is callable by anyone. That sounds like a more reasonable restriction.
So we're committing.
Is it a renewal
That
or
sounds like
renewal?
a lot though, like
That sounds scary.
No, because so maybe.
my
Yeah,
primary
that
goal
could be a lot.
is,
I can see that. I can see that being a lot.
We can combine two really good ideas. We can say that we will provide a whitelist of function signatures that it's safe for anyone to call. But then you can choose like your proxy contract and look those up and forward the call if it's in the list.
And like have a bunch of dummy names in there so we can decide later what functions they are.
yeah,
Because
So I think Piper has a good point there, is that maybe we are adding a lot of complexity for something that we really don't need. Because let's say that we come up with a new register system. Of course, we won't do that. Let's say that the new register system requires you to upload a picture and confirm an email and do a lot of things. And a bunch of actions that you need to do in order to really own that new thing. What we could do is that we could have a pre-register thing where you just click the update and then you have to do all the other actions necessary. So I think I'm also having a hard time.
who has to do all those other actions?
Whoever called.
right, but if I blacklist, if I say the owner, the contractor is the owner, right, of the subdomain, there's a contract, if I write that contract to be like, the only thing you can do is update registration or whatever, if I say that, then I can't do those things.
Why not let your sub-registrars have an I am a contract function that returns true, so the registrars can call that and at least that way in the future we'll know the difference between what, to be fair, is the massive majority, which are going to be address-owned, standard address-owned names, and something that is a contract, and we couldn't worry about how to deal with that separately, but at least we'll know the two cases, because the one case is going to be honestly quite small, and probably I don't think there's probably anyone outside of this room who will actually have written sub-registrars.
I think it will be, but so you're suggesting explicitly grandfathering in contracts as having a guarantee to have a special reduced API, and then all promises are off if you're not.
Simple thing, right? We want to upload a photograph. Well, use a photograph of my contract. Well, the thing is, we can see there are going to likely be separate conditions for addresses owned by people that want to be recognised as owned by people and addresses owned by contracts. So,
No. I think the goal in human is more and more the difference between owned by people and owned by a contract is less
Thinner.
That's just like a weird philosophical thing that we have. Like I don't know if that's like actually like a real.
right? And it's like you said, I'll
We're
go
gonna use
further.
contracts for identity,
You know.
all sorts of things. So you're gonna
They're still very much non-human.
If there's an advantage to having something owned by a contract considered a human owner, then the human will just write contracts, right? So we can't make things better for human owners than the worse for human owners than the expectation.
Well, so smart contracts have a certain amount of restriction of what they can call in the future that like humans don't, right?
Yes.
Like there's a certain extent to which like transactions that come out from outside the EVM are going to be important to this process, right? And maybe even like, so the whole issue with forward compatibility is that we're gonna specify functions that are need to be called later by contracts that are deployed now, potentially, if we want to use contracts now, right? And but like externally owned accounts can call any function on any contract that's deployed later, right? Whereas contracts that are deployed now can only call functions that are already like existing now. You feel the proxy contract, sure, but then it's just really coming out from the outside things.
all transactions originate from the outside.
Yeah, the transactions are like calls, calls like will only call like a function that isn't part of the contract's code if they were provided in transaction data or call data, like out of some ABI stuff.
How long do, maybe I have a feeling that this discussion isn't as important as maybe like spending too much time on it, because it really sounds to me that there are like a couple simple solutions that we can come up with, and I think honestly the blacklist for me is the solution good enough. And
Clarify what you mean by the blacklist.
I've seen Piper's blacklist where you just say you can do any transaction but A, B, and C.
But who is you? Is that the owner or is that everyone?
The contract is a proxy contract, allows the owner of that contract to do any transaction but a given set of a list.
But now the owner has the ability to not do anything, which could result in
Which is always the case.
So maybe this.
Okay,
but
Wait.
the goal is to make
Can't the proxy,
For
but can't the proxy contract set up that anyone can call it?
yes, but then we're making a guarantee
Yeah, but
that
then,
anything in that whitelist will be safe for anyone to call.
But I mean, do we need that kind of
Oh, I
level of
see.
guarantee right now, this moment?
So Alan, this is what I was trying to say earlier, I know the answer is clear, like, we don't have to do anything, like the ENS doesn't have to do anything about the subdomains. I can literally put a contract up there right now that operates in a certain way. Like I can make a subdomain right now that operates in a certain way. What's gonna happen is that when I have all my users on this contract that I set up in whatever way I felt like, then when we talk about the upgraded contract, the ENS is gonna have to make decisions, and then you're gonna come to a fork in the road at some point in time and say, okay, do we wanna sacrifice this design detail, or do we wanna sacrifice, the 100,000 users that have my ether wallet subdomains? And that's what I don't wanna happen. That's why we're having this conversation. Okay, because I don't want a contract design decision to be affected by a stupid not decision that was made, by me writing a contract for my subdomains. That's what I don't want happening, and the reality is that my ether wallet is big enough that that will happen, and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, but that's my point. I'm not very worried that when it comes to time to upgrade, oh my God, Taylor will abandon those 1,000 users and not upgrade, right? I'm worried that I understand that you want to build something that other people cannot abuse it, and that if you
that she can't control.
Yeah, that she can't control. If you find your wallet.
Here's my goal. I want to give people subdomains. I want to let people buy subdomains from me, right? Okay? And then when it comes time to upgrade, I want to make sure that we move to that thing. That's it. That's my goal.
But in the meantime, you don't want to just have a key for the owner of the team.
Well, yeah.
Right, so that's
That
the
would be
thing.
nice.
If you're willing to have the key, then we can just not have this conversation.
Yeah, but
or you wouldn't need the conversation.
I'm okay
I
with
don't
trusting that
want-
Taylor will press the button. I
So
don't
this is very
mind.
different, like how this is like a human smart contract difference, right?
Right.
So I think what you're maybe trying to say is that maybe the inaction piece should be something that we ignore because
And I'm
because
more
the
with that.
inaction piece is sort of like the blacklist. It doesn't allow you to redirect people's funds or redirect people's site to a different place. The inaction piece will just mean that that subdomain dies and everything under it gets zeroed out and stops working, which is shitty.
In the new domain, but not,
In
not
the-
this old.
Which is
But I think that that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
Like, it's my responsibility as a subdomain. Like, as much as we say it's trustless, like, you still have to have some layer.
No,
I
I'm
just
talking
would
about
rather not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right out.
Like,
Yeah, just don't buy a subdomain from someone that you don't think will be malicious, not acting. I think that's it, right?
Or like, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's possible to eliminate the risk of like,
Action.
of inaction. Yeah, I don't think that.
Well, it is, depending on what guarantees we're willing to make about it.
Yeah, sure, but then the question
Maybe
is,
I guess
we
we
want to
should
spend the
rephrase
whole afternoon just to make
No.
sure that
No.
that just one person that has like the subdomain will not be able to not do anything, right?
No, I mean, it actually is important, yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I totally feel that, you know, for Taylor, not wanting to control these names.
Yeah, but
I wouldn't want to control the names of all of my little
I
users.
agree.
And like, imagine I get hacked and then like they all get fished.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Exactly. Feel my pain.
But are you okay with trusting that at some point in the next year, Taylor will press a button?
Or that she won't lose the key in the meantime.
I'm more concerned about her personal safety
Well,
and
it's gonna be a
liability.
contract.
Yeah,
Not
but you
about
get,
her
we're talking about the
willingness
bonus
to
and
press.
renewal.
Wait, two people. So,
Oh.
Well,
Well, yeah, it's gonna be a contract. It's gonna be like multi-sig.
yeah, but okay, but.
So we have to like, you know.
But what I'm
be
saying, what I'm
contract.
saying in general is you're not only relying on the owner to want to push the button, you're also relying on them to still be able to push the button at the time of the
That's true. And I mean, okay, so yes, you're right, but in my opinion, I think that like when you buy a subdomain from someone, like you should be like when people use our site, right? They should be allowed to have the knowledge that like I can't steal their money, right? That doesn't mean that like, you know, if I go and decide to move to Thailand and not support my Ether wallet, like that's still a possibility. Part of like the magic of my Ether wallet is that like you can use our site and you know that I don't have your private key. And also if you disappear, if my Ether wallet just implodes, like it's gonna be a pain in the freaking ass. But like you can still access your funds, right? So like when you use my Ether wallet and if you were to buy my Ether wallet subdomain, it's like we want to ensure that you that like I can't screw you, that I can't go steal your money, that I'm not responsible for you, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not necessarily ensuring that like I'm gonna be around forever and pressing the button. And people shouldn't believe that either. And I don't think that they do because in the real world that's just not.
but I think that's a job for the permanent registrar. You're not talking about pressing the button forever. You're just talking about doing that in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
And at some
exactly.
point, the permanent registrar will not need to press
Well,
the
and we'll
button.
see how it goes. I mean, the thing is that like maybe it is a problem. Maybe in 2 to 3 years, like we have 10 different subdomains and 9 out of the 10 literally don't press the button, and you know, then we deal with that situation when it comes.
Well, it's also
In my opinion.
Yeah, because like most of
Because
the
it's
into a
intermediary
contract.
association.
the way that
I
commercial
mean,
subdomains work on like a real DNS is that like the company owns your domain, like, and that's how it is. That's what people are used to. So like all of what we're talking about is like a completely new idea.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I mean, giving them a little more freedom. Like, I mean, even if you're basically like, the only thing we can't do is like, as long as you renew this, we can't take it back from you. And people are like, wow, that's like a lot. Like basically if fucking one of these free website builders shuts down, you lose your domain. Like, and that's like, I mean, any little bit that we give anybody, they're going to be happy with. Like this is like, you're like, give them total freedom. It's like, no one cares about freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistic freedom is a better approach. Like,
Well,
you know,
I think if that's the best we can achieve, then that's the best we can achieve, but I don't think we should give up immediately and conclude that is the best.
oh, okay, I
So-
agree with that. But
so-
also, like, I do value the other conversations that we're gonna have today, and I feel like this is really focused on like what's essentially a small part, and like especially on our specific use
But don't you think
cases,
it's a good thing that you should do? Like instead of implementing something and speculating on what you're gonna have to call in the future and what you're never gonna call now, or like committing to what you're never gonna call now, just have them all these things, being able to call anything and just like don't tell them to keep equal it, all right? Right.
They're all the same.
Okay, so that's this, like, are we as a group satisfied with saying that, like, us, like, that the owner can upgrade without calling the transfer function? Or,
No,
sorry,
wait.
being be upgraded, like, when the new registrar comes along, right?
Do we know the set of functions that the owner must call to upgrade?
Yeah,
No.
But
We
can
don't
we answer,
want
can we
all
answer a
that.
different question, which is that
And we don't know,
can we guarantee that no operation required to keep the domain active will have to be called by the owner?
yes,
Because
that's
if
why.
we can answer that in the affirmative, then our problem is solved.
But they want to
Say the question again?
Can we guarantee that no operation required to keep the domain active will have to be called only by the owner?
Only if we
That
are
seems
okay.
impossible.
Does that top level have to be upgraded for all of the other ones to be upgraded? Because that is another problem. Like if the owner doesn't upgrade, then they can, every one of the users, like their subdomain holders wants to upgrade it, they should be able to
So
upgrade
the
all
users,
the
the users don't have to upgrade, only the owner has to upgrade.
But it has to be upgraded. What if the owner
Yeah.
doesn't want to
Yeah,
upgrade?
what if one of the owners
That
want
was
to change it?
that was
One of the
the
owners
malicious
want to
inaction
change
that
it.
we're talking about.
But it's,
That's the malicious
what
inaction.
if it's not malicious? It's just like,
It could be not, it could be a
That's-
political decision, yeah, they could be like, I want this, I want to stick with the old registry.
yeah.
The old registry is
Your
fine.
choice is.
That's a real crypto anarchy right there.
But that's not actually a choice you're being offered.
Well, not for now.
Well, not ever.
You
You can choose not to.
You can't
If
do
you get
that.
But you were saying that the old registry doesn't have a claim obsolescence.
Right, the new registry will be able to also.
Yeah, but if you stay on the old registry,
Then
you'll resolve the same way on the old registry.
because the new registry, 3 months after you decide not to upgrade, will just delete the name from.
Yeah, but is that so only you think we're using root, right? Or what? Well, how is so?
The registrar is aware of the.
So is that why? Because it's an address that you get replaced that keeps this continuity. Like you should be able to. Why can't the interfaces just decide? Okay, let's change the owner.
But because the current registry will show if it's not the owner of the .if top level domain.
So,
Okay.
So eventually, the new registry will go,
Okay.
your grace period is over, somebody else can now buy your name,
Okay.
and, or, you know.
So basically, if you don't do an upgrade, it's always malicious. That's what you're saying. Not upgrading.
No, you might want your deposit back and just not want to use the name anymore, or you might disagree with the terms. of the
Sorry, if you don't do an
registrar.
upgrade and you throw out all of your sub-registries
Yeah.
that lots of people are using, and without talking to them, then it's fine, then it's malicious.
Probably.
unless, I
And so
think
that's
we
the
can't
concern, right?
provide bulletproof safety unless we're also able to guarantee forever what both the upgrade and subdomain APIs look like.
Well, what about what I suggested earlier, that is, the actions required to keep the name active will never be owner only. But we don't have to specify what those APIs are, just that they
But
have
then-
restrictions.
you're
all the
assuming
owner
that
No,
ones
hold
are
on.
specified.
We already have one that we can't do because we've guaranteed that the owner is the only one who may call
Right,
upgrade.
but that's easy, we could just say deeds have to provide an interface to that function. What we could say is no new functions will be introduced that are owner only and are mandatory for keeping your name.
Yeah, but then.
So here's how we try to come up with a
Any
counter.
owner-only functions now.
You can only provide that if you are willing to ignore the deed and ignore the value in the deed.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is that you own a name, you want to release that.
Yes.
I do not have.
I troll you and renew it for you.
Yeah, exactly. I renew it for you. You don't
I
want
think that one's
to
in
have to
my
renew it.
I have ones in my contract.
Well, that depends what the permanent registrar does.
We won't implement that API.
If
What?
it gives, if transition to permanent registrar gives the original owner back their money, then whether or not you renew has no impact. But yes, this division has an impact on how we can design the
That's what
registrar in regards to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am kind of happy to say, okay, like, the recommended best practice for sub-registries is to have a multi-sig and not give people this guarantee, because it's kind of, I mean, I think it's probably fine
Yeah, so
to basically say that all the owner only functions just have been specified now, and everything else is callable by anyone. But is
I mean, just
I think, we need like a proof that everything we're gonna wanna upgrade to enable.
I don't think we can do that because we're already talking about adding a like renewal and like monthly payment.
Those could be callable by anyone.
No, they have to be owner only.
Why?
Because if we make it so that anybody can renew any domain name,
Yeah.
then you control the entire ENS system.
No, renewing it just keeps the same owner of the name.
I know, I wanna let the name go.
Then call the let the name
Get
go
the money.
function, which only the owner can call.
Yeah.
Well, there is no let go.
He wants them to expire, he thinks the
Right.
names will expire
Okay,
if.
I lost
You don't
my
have this.
key,
Yes.
I can't force it to let
No,
go.
that's the case.
And now, somebody control that name forever
No,
and
the-
never
Yeah,
let it
well,
go.
you've never bid against them, they don't control it, they just deny you access.
Yes.
No, that's
The denial of
the
service,
exact same-
in the case you lose key.
Right, but if yours was a sub-registrar, the exact same situation, you do want some anonymous string to be able to provide.
I'm-
Right, which is that why I belongs in the proxy line.
Right.
I do not think we can make that
Like
guarantee.
if that's a use case for me, that belongs in my proxy contract. So that like basically there's a function in my contract that allows anyone to call it, which will then allow the proxy contract to call the registrar.
But since we don't know what it looks like, we.
Right, which is why, I mean, I'm guessing that I'm gonna have to make this contract upgradable no matter what.
So we can go one step further with regards to the multi-sig thing. We can recommend that people hold the owner as a multi-sig and that they write the sub-registrar that the multi-sig can only do anything when the new registrar comes into place. Because it is trivial to check whether the interim registrar is still in place or not.
Yeah,
You can say,
that's I think a good
I
one.
can do nothing now until the new registrar comes into place and effectively reverts entirely to multi-sig ownership. You're gonna have to exercise caution during the period while you keep an eye on what the multi-sig does and then
But
maybe.
it'll hopefully be a one-time thing, and then you'll
Yeah.
be back in this mode where you don't have to do anything at least until the next time it is gone.
So maybe that's the best we can do.
And I mean, it at least that limits the risk, like it limits the risk for the users. The users do have the ability to trust us
It limits your
somewhat.
ability to do anything.
It limits my responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, it reduces the probability that like other subdomains who like may base their contracts on my contract act maliciously. Right? I mean, that's the thing, it's like if I
They
have
can
a
lease
contract.
out their subdomains and do malicious things like that.
And if you really
Yeah, I
want
mean, you can always do malicious things. I just wanna like, and that's the thing, like we can't, as much as I'd like to protect the world, we can't. So, you know, what steps can we take basically to limit the risk and make it a little bit more obvious if someone is like trying to do something malicious, you know, so there's telling signs, like if this is sort of becomes like this de facto contract that acts as a base, right? And then all of a sudden it's like one function just disappears, like at least then you have the opportunity to ask why, right? That's what I wanna create a world where basically like it's people question the motivations of people a little bit more.
So our idea, just to re-clarify, is that this is a recommendation, this isn't even an API change or anything like that. The recommendation is, if you want to revoke your rights, write it so that your rights are revoked until this returns true.
until the registrar.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yes, and the returns true is whatever query to say there is a new registrar.
Yeah.
At which point your users must understand upfront that you're gonna regain the ability to do whatever you want and trust that you're going to revoke your abilities.
And
Or just do something sensible.
and that while we're recommending things, we should recommend that the owner be a multi-sig and so on.
Yeah.
And I should point out that if you really want to troll us, you could make the owner the ENS root and then tell us that we have to fix it because.
Oh, I know, that's the thing, like, there's a lot of little things that people could do.
Actually, that idea, like, yeah, that has lots of, you know.
Okay,
I don't mind it if it's 3 sub-registries, I'd be a little worried if it's 500 sub-registries.
so this works.
Is there,
This
do
works
we-
for Mu, probably, except for if you get served a warrant,
right,
at which point you will be able to say no until you can't say no.
until I can't say no anymore, right, and that's, we'll deal with that, I mean, I
Which is
think that's,
unfortunate,
I mean, the thing is, we can't eliminate all risk from everything, like, that's the thing, like, if you don't wanna do a subdomain, you don't wanna deal with responsibilities of a subdomain, don't make a subdomain.
Or just give.
You know, and if you want a perfect world where you control everything and you don't rely on anyone else, then don't buy a subdomain. You know, like, that's the thing, but at the same time, like, just because that's like the end all be all, like, that's where it is, doesn't mean that we can't take steps to, you know,
With this-
mitigate the risk on both ends.
With the scheme, owners can actually pre-commit to, like, let's say the API, the registrar becomes known 6 months before its deployment, they can run a contract that defines what will happen when it becomes active, and they can make that the new owner, and then pre-commit to that happening.
Yeah,
Therefore, there's not even a window of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right, so you can commit before you have these new permissions, how it's gonna be switched.
Yeah. Okay, and that
That's
still
the-
allows
and-
people to voluntarily
Yeah.
revoke their permissions.
Yes.
And
then
not have a window in which their permissions become
That's
unrevocable.
Or at least
Or
the
a
people,
window in which the people don't know their security.
Sure.
Yeah,
They can know it up front, and if you don't get your shit together in time and it's about to,
then,
they can choose to exit the system
right.
before.
And someone can choose to like hand you like a order real quick during that time.
Which is why
Like
you should-
darts in the window, like drops it, like darts out.
which is why you should pre-commit as long as
Yeah.
you safely can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Did we
So,
decide on the transfer function,
That's-
is that
That's
one
what
that
we're
we
at
did?
now.
Okay,
Yeah, we don't, now we just be creative without thinking about ENS, right, that much directly. Right, so
yeah. So who here thinks that that thing we just said is a good idea?
That's the best idea.
Okay, who's gonna write it down so we don't forget exactly
It's
what
all
it
being
is?
recorded.
Okay, just, so,
What's the
everyone
time
knows,
set?
just go to the hour one,
Did-
after with 2 hours and.
No, go to the section where Alex does a little gorilla dance.
Does anyone want to volunteer a summary?
I like trying to put words together.
Okay.
Go.
We want to build a system that allows for name owners to grant their subdomain owners a high degree of confidence that they will be in full control of their name and will not have it taken away from them, or whatever it is that the domain owner is revoking their ability to do. We don't think that we can make this bulletproof because of registrar upgrades. So the proposed solution is that when you author the contract that you're going to transfer control of all of the domain management to, that contract should only unlock the ability to make arbitrary actions when there is a new registrar in place. The idea is that with that scheme, and as long as we're able to announce new registrars with a sufficiently long timeline, somebody who has revoked their permissions can then create the new owner that has the properly revoked permissions for the new API and pre-commit that upgrade ahead of time so that there is no period of, so that their users can know ahead of time that they will not enter a period of uncertainty, that the upgrade will happen smoothly without them ever having the ability to do anything.
Without this multi-sig having ability to call arbiter.
Yeah, this doesn't keep you from just choosing to wait for the ability to make arbitrary actions and then to do whatever they want. But it does give users the ability to know that that's coming and to get the hell out of there.
But
And to call us out, and to
But it also
file a
gives
lawsuit.
and it gives you an opportunity to actually to commit to the decision that you'll make after the multi-sig is kind of like free, or after the upgrade, after this upgrade.
I think that's good. I think that's a good summary too.
And I think I know this is something that myself and Taylor and others have been spending hours and hours thinking about, and I'm all pleased that we managed to come up with something. So again, everyone pat on the back. So we're running a little ahead of schedule, but do you want to jump into the? Oh no, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back.